Welcome, everyone. This is Joe Dagger, the host of the Business 901 podcast. With me today is Lita Citroen. She is an international reputation management and branding specialist who designs the identities of companies and professionals. She seems to have another focus, or maybe a mission would be appropriate here, and that's to help America's employers learn how to recruit, onboard, and grow veteran employees to support business and brand goals. She sits on the board of advisors for the National Association of Veteran Service Organizations and teaches the Transition GPS program at the Air Force Academy and a few other veteran-type works that I noticed. Her newest book, Engaging with Veteran Talent, is a reference for employers seeking to source, hire, onboard, and develop veteran talent. Lita, thanks for taking the time out and joining me.
My pleasure. It's great to be here.
Well, how did you get started with veterans? I guess that's $1 million question. Are you an ex-military or an Army brat or something?
That would seem obvious, but no, it actually happened at a Denver Broncos football game. I've been doing this thing called personal branding, reputation management for many, many years. And November 9, 2009, I was sitting at the football game. It was not a great game because we played the Steelers and we weren't a good team at the time. But it happened to be the week of Veterans Day, and the team did a tribute to returning military at halftime. And what I heard them say were things like, we don't know how to sell ourselves when we transition out of uniform. We don't know how to talk about our military experience so that a civilian hiring manager would find us relevant. And it occurred to me that what I was doing on the professional side was something that hadn't been offered to veterans. So I decided to see if I could help. And that was 7 years ago. And it's become a passion. It's become a business for me. And it's definitely something that is a mission, as you mentioned.
Well, yeah. Well, your first book was actually for veterans trying to get hired, correct?
Well, my second book. My first book was for civilians like myself. And the second book in 2014 was a workbook for veterans that want to learn how to build a brand. You know, the military does a great job of training them to serve the military role, but we have to return them to being civilians, and personal branding is a great way to do that. So I wrote a book, and it went like wildfire. So it's still a bestseller.
I was in the 82nd, and I got out, and I was discharged, so I kind of experienced going out and getting a job. My son just got out of the Air Force recently in the last 6 months. And by the way, he gave you a thumbs up on your TED video. Okay.
Yay! Yay! That's so awesome.
He said, I watched that. She's pretty good. I liked her.
Thank you. I'll take it.
There's a difference from a veteran standpoint. When you walk out in your first jobs, in your first times that you're out kind of selling yourself, you feel a little odd. It's not the military anymore. You've been conditioned a little bit. Is that true?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I like to tell employers as well as reassure veterans with is this concept between I versus we. Right? As a civilian myself, I have no trouble telling you what makes me great. I can write my bio. I can deliver an elevator pitch. I am really good at articulating my value proposition. But the military teaches service before self, right? So it's not about you as an individual. It's about passing credit and accolades and praise down to those who fought alongside of you or served under you. But you take accountability and responsibility. That becomes a challenge when that same soldier or airman sits in front of a civilian hiring manager, and that hiring manager says, tell me what makes you great. Why should I hire you over the other people? That person, that veteran, feels like if they sell themselves, they're being disloyal to those who served with them. And I hear that time and time again. So my goal isn't to teach you and your son how to brag, but it's how to articulate what makes you valuable to that hiring manager or to that networking contact or to that client that you're going to have to sell yourself to. And it's a fundamental disconnect between what our veterans are experiencing and what civilians have learned to get good at.
Well, and I think what, just really rang a bell with me when you said that lean type approach, that servant leadership type approach in the Agile world where those are the somewhat the type of persons we're looking for now. That more of that team type things that we're searching for in employees right now.
And that's a great example of an industry that or a methodology or approach that can take a veteran and so quickly adapt them. You're absolutely right. The agile, the lean environment where it's focused on mission, it's focused on tasks, it's accountability, but it's also working well as a team, knowing that collaboration is more the goal than necessarily consensus. And veterans are extremely well skilled at that. And we sometimes forget that what happens in a military context, especially in the environment you're talking about, is so easily transferable to the skills that a veteran brings.
You really nailed it, because when you're sitting there, we talk about complexity and things like that. And what I always use is, the veteran organization, they use the OODA loop, which has become real popular in discussions in the Agile. And then, General McChrystal's new book and his organization's kind of teaching that same thing. And what I've always found so amazing about military, they understood their boundaries, and that's how I try to describe lean and agile to people. Is in the standard work things, is if you understand your boundaries, there's not really a question in a veteran's mind of what he's supposed to do and when he's, let's say in a lean term, pull the andon cord, right?
True, but don't you also find though that a veteran is also the person who says, even though it's not my job, if I see a problem over here or I see a way to innovate or fix something, they're going to raise their hand and they're going to go do it. Whereas a civilian might find those boundaries more rigid and say, hey, it's not my job to fix that. I'll wait till he fixes it. And so I do think a veteran actually brings another layer of leadership to those environments, so that they want to fix the problem. They might not do it in the smoothest way, because it's about completing tasks and fulfilling a mission, but they're not going to be necessarily handcuffed by parameters in the way that a civilian might. It's just been something I've been told.
Oh, no, and I think you're correct, because we talk about overlapping responsibilities and things like that, and we talk about an org chart anymore looking more like a Venn diagram than it does a tree, okay? But let's get to that. Your new book specifically talks about HR and how their approach to veterans are. You think that veterans coming out with this chain of command, this real rigid process, but the Marines were the first ones to really adapt the OODA loop real well, and they've adopted agility more so than others. And does HR recognize that now? Is that something that they even know that is in the veteran blood?
Well, and I think your question begs another question, which is the only portal for a veteran into a company through HR, right? And it's obvious to think that HR, because they're running diversity and inclusion and all of these different initiatives, would have responsibility. But we're seeing veteran hiring initiatives come in through the marketing door. We're seeing them come from the C-level. And all of those communities within the organization must communicate. But HR typically is where a lot of the veteran hiring starts, right? It starts with the recruiters or the hiring managers. And my message to HR is always to look at the hiring of veterans as a business driver, not as just a patriotic responsibility. The reason behind that is it's great to do things that feel good and are our way of saying thank you to the men and women who wore the uniform. But the sustainability and scalability of these programs comes when you attach this kind of a hiring initiative to business, right? What are the business drivers? What are the brand goals? How does hiring veterans make us a stronger, better, more adaptable organization? Veterans are not charity. They are truly an exceptional workforce. And the reason I bring that up is because I think a lot of times companies think about it as a nice to have. It feels good if we have our nation's heroes working down the hall, but that won't sustain or scale a program. Let's look at the leadership, the adaptability, the cultural diversity, the reason that we hire veterans beyond just the feel good. And those reasons are clearly tied to business drivers. And the companies that have adapted and really embraced that are the ones that are seeing the results from these kinds of initiatives.
Where's some of the common stereotypes that are just plain wrong? Okay, I mean, are there a couple?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, I wish I could list them all. I think one of the first and foremost is the issues around PTSD. This perception, and I've heard from hiring managers that, they're afraid of what they don't know. And the media portrays veterans as typically having symptoms or issues around PTSD. When we look at the facts, right? PTSD is a human condition. It's not a military condition. And 8% of Americans are living with some form of PTSD. The most common reason people have PTSD is automobile related. So it's a car accident, witnessing or being in a car accident. Then comes terrorist activity. You were near 9/11. You knew someone who was involved in a terror. The combat related PTSD, which is the biggest stereotype, is so far down on the list that the odds of you dealing with someone who has combat related PTSD as a hiring manager are very few. That's a big misperception. You mentioned the command and control style of leadership. There's this perception that we have that veterans, are good at taking orders. So give them orders and they will go out and they will execute those orders. Well, I think we forget that veterans also learn to improvise and be creative, right? I'm not sure what your service history was, but for many of the veterans that I talk to, they're like, yeah, we have a plan, we have a strategy, but once you're in the field or once you're in the mission, the plan only got you to 5% of what you're doing. You got to think on your feet. You've got to be able to go this way or go this way based on what's in front of you. And that requires creative thinking, a strategic mindset. And those are two misperceptions, I think, that are limiting employers from really looking at a veteran as a viable candidate for whatever role they're looking to fill.
No, and I think those are great words of advice because we are sitting there trying to be agile, okay, and trying to hire people to think on their feet. And one of the things I always think about is that here's a military job. It's a military job. It's not a civilian job. The time someone goes in as an electronics guy and he gets out and is so far away from commercial electronics, okay?
Yeah.
Unless he goes for a defense contractor or something.
Sure.
But is there a difference if I'm a supply chain or a purchasing job in the military? Does that really give me good background and training for a civilian purchasing job?
Well, and I think your last example is closer to what makes sense to talk about. I mean, let's face it, there aren't a lot of jobs for snipers in the civilian world. So,
right.
A supply chain, procurement, logisticians, the terms may not line up perfectly. Somebody isn't likely not coming out of the military with a PMP certification, but the skills that they developed are very closely aligned oftentimes with what companies are looking for. Where we get into challenges is if we're hiring just off of certification or off of specific experience. The advice I always like to give employers, regardless of whether they're working in a lean environment or not, is you can teach skills, you can't teach character. So if somebody has closely aligned skills or closely aligned training, but they don't have a certification and they don't have that technical degree that you need them to have, you can teach them that. You can train them up on those certifications, but you can't teach someone to be loyal and have integrity and operate with a work ethic that is exemplary. You can't teach that. You can teach the certifications. And for a lot of those supply chain logisticians, yes, a logistician in the military is going to have a lot of skills that are transferable. The title, the MOS, might look a little different than what the hiring manager in the corporation is putting on the job requirement. And that's also tricky for veterans. I coached a gentleman out of the Air Force, actually, and he was a logistician. And it was actually one of the first times I had heard that term. And he would refuse to call it anything else but a logistician. And I said, okay, I understand you're looking for a logistician job. I don't know what that means. So tell me what you did. He said, well, I moved fleets. I was responsible for making sure that all the trucks and the cargo and the equipment got from point A to point B. I said, okay, so would you be able to, for instance, run a fleet of school buses for a school district? He said, of course, that's logistician work. I'm like, well, they don't call it that. And we actually got him a job as a fleet director for one of the largest school districts, because what he had done was the job that this group was hiring for, but they didn't call it a logistician. They didn't call it what he'd been told it was called in the military. So that's a challenge on both sides. And that's where some of these skills translators do a good job. And if a hiring manager or an employer just understands the skills and the training behind the title, they can start looking at those adaptive skills that work really well across different cultures.
Is there a difference, though, on boarding a veteran versus a normal civilian type? Is it going to take longer? I mean, what is there challenges there?
And that's a great question. Thank you for asking, because I think the perception is that there are all these heavy lifting requirements that it's going to take to get veterans on board. And it does require a little adapting of the onboarding process, but it's not expensive and it's not time consuming. Some of the best practices that I have found with the companies that I've worked with are set different expectations when it comes to your veterans, meaning help them understand what does it take to get from this job to the next job. What does the career path look like? Have an open conversation with them about expectations. The military transition job process is very different than in the civilian world. We have different rules. We have different expectations. Just lay that out with a veteran. Make it clear for them, what does it take to get to the next rung in the ladder? Similarly, create a good dialogue so that they can ask questions. What they will encounter in the civilian or the private sector is often going to be very different than what they had in the military. Creating a good two-way dialogue that says, you know what, I'm going to check in with you, Joe, and just make sure that everything's working. I'm going to provide you with a mentor. I'm going to give you some tools that maybe my civilians don't need when I onboard them. But I know from your background as a veteran, these are things that are important to you. So I'm going to check in with you a little bit more often. I want you to check in with me. I want you to ask questions. Again, encouraging a two-way dialogue is very important with a veteran. Also in the onboarding process, and this is an easy one, is consider the family. Involve the spouse. A veteran's spouse and support network is such a big part of that transition that if the spouse is made part of a hiring process or made part of the onboarding or included at the company picnic or the holiday party, the veteran feels a different sense of loyalty, and that doesn't cost money to do. Those are easy ways that employers can onboard a veteran more smoothly that builds loyalty and builds a better relationship.
So we talk about the good stuff. All veterans, good employees, good military guys. I mean, is there a telltale sign that maybe if he wasn't even a good fit in the military, does that mean he's not going to be a good fit in civilian job or vice versa? I mean, is there things I should watch out for and odd thing there?
Well, and I think it's important to remember that the military recruits from the same job pool that civilians do, right? They're recruiting civilians. So we're all people, and just like all people, you can have a great employee or an employee who doesn't live up to expectations. You can have an employee who's stable and ready to get to work, and you can have an employee who's got things going on in their personal life that they haven't dealt with. The same goes for veterans. No two veterans are the same, right? They're human beings who joined the military, had a different experience, and came out with a different mindset. So I think sometimes we tend to generalize. And I'm guilty of that myself. I've hired veterans who were fantastic hires, and I've hired ones that, it wasn't a good alignment with what I'm trying to get done. It's a misnomer to think all veterans are the same. As with any hiring, you're looking at the individual. What are the character qualities? What are their goals? What do they want to do? Are they just looking for a job because they want a paycheck, or are they looking to invest in a company and grow with our team and add value? Those are questions you would ask any candidate, and I don't think it changes when you're talking about veterans. They simply are civilians who took years out of their life, whether it was 4 or 40, and went and worked in a very different culture. And now they're reintegrating back into the community that they started with, and they've learned some different skills. So the hiring manager needs to ask the same behavioral interviewing questions, the same human questions that you would of a civilian to understand if that person's a good fit.
Well, I'm going to throw this back on HR a little bit, and I got to be careful not to sound bad to HR people, okay? But
no, we don't want to do that.
No. I always kind of thought that HR never hired the best person for the job. They hired the safest person. Is a veteran safe?
Well, again, I would go back to no two veterans are the same. No two civilians are the same. Is a veteran a safe choice? I think it's a tougher choice for HR. I think if you look at the numbers, there's 99% of the American population are people like me who didn't serve, who don't have a direct connection to the military. 1% of the population are you and your family, where you understand the military narrative, you understand what it means to put your life on the line for something so much greater than yourself, and to sacrifice and commit what you and your family had to for yourself as well as for your son to serve our country. So there's a very small percent of the population that understands what you understand. I don't know that HR is approaching hiring veterans or not hiring veterans because they see it as a safe or a not safe choice. I think it's a lot of the unknown. Right? Is it going to be expensive to hire veterans? Are there things that I have to learn? Do I have to create a new hiring system? And it's that unknowing that often stops them. Why I wrote the book is I was trying to break some of that down. It does not have to be an expensive initiative. It doesn't have to be a huge, robust retooling of all the systems and marketing. But it does require you to understand a few things about this community of Americans who have done something different with part of their life. And that's why I wrote Engaging with Veteran Talent, to kind of spell it out in a very practical, easy, and accessible way. I included a glossary at the end of the book because these were terms I didn't understand. I didn't know the difference between an officer and enlisted, or what does it mean to be an NCO? What is the difference between, the Army and the Marines? This wasn't part of my narrative, and I wanted to learn more, but nobody had an accessible tool that I could keep on my desk. So I think a lot of it has to do with awareness. I don't think HR is trying to avoid hiring veterans. I don't think they're hiring them because they perceive them as safe, to use your word. I think they're trying to do the right thing for the company and grow the talent in an intentional, strategic, and meaningful way. I'm trying to make the case that veterans fit into that model. And they actually elevate the position of HR because they're hiring from all different levels of diversity. Veterans are men, they are women, they are all different colors, all different religions, all different ethnicities. I mean, it's a wonderful workforce to recruit from. And if HR understands and sees how accessible these candidates are, and if I can help veterans better position themselves to be relevant and compelling to HR, then we have a win-win. Then veterans are coming into the market and competing for jobs on the same playing field as civilians. And that's really my objective, is to just level the playing field.
And I think there's so many things that people don't understand about veterans, and that camaraderie that's built, and it's practically a family atmosphere that is built in the ones I've experienced and know. And they're like people always have their college buddies and things like that. Well, you have your military buddies for life. They're part of your life the rest of the time, I think.
Well, and I never had to make a decision of whether I would sacrifice my life for my college friends, right? I mean, I might decide whether I was going to report them to an RA, but so I think it's a little different even than that. And in the years I've worked with military, I still can't comprehend what it means to have that type of loyalty to the team that is in front, to the side, and behind me in high stress situations. So I empathize, I understand a lot about it, but I would never say that I can fully embrace that. What I've also seen from veterans is when they see a company or when they see an individual doing it right or trying to do it right, the camaraderie and the support they have is unbelievable. When I launched my second book, which was written for them, and I said, I need your help. I need your help letting other veterans know this tool is available. It's good for you. It makes sense. They trusted me, and I had built so much rapport and goodwill with them. They became my army, so to speak, and they went out into the marketplace and told people about my book. So I find them very loyal. It takes a little bit to trust someone, but once they trust an employer, once they trust an individual, they will go to the ends of the earth to promote and help recruit for that employer. So that's a great opportunity for HR. They're a tremendous recruiting source.
What would you say to HR? I mean, we need to wind up this podcast. What would be the one message that you would leave with them?
that hiring, onboarding, and developing veteran talent is not as cumbersome and as expensive as they think it is. It can be done on a small scale. I work with companies that want to hire 2 veterans, and I work with companies that are hiring 20,000 veterans by the year 2020. It doesn't have to be a huge, expensive initiative. It requires some awareness. It requires a little bit of training and understanding, some sensitivity and in empathy, and then it means starting. Just start, hire 1 or 2 and talk to them. What was their experience like? Build off of that, tying the values and the brand of the company into that strategy. And then by a couple years, you all of a sudden have something that is self-generating, that is sustainable. It doesn't have to be as hard as we think it is. This is a workforce that is going to produce a return on the investment very quickly. They're human beings who bring exceptional qualities and traits into the civilian market that are desperately needed by most of these companies. And especially in the environment you're talking about with lean, agile, these companies that are working in processes, this is a fantastic workforce to pull from.
I think you have some great advice. I didn't ask enough about you and what you're doing right now. So what else is upcoming for you and the best way to contact you?
Well, the best way to contact me is obviously through my website, lita360.com. I do have a page on there for veterans. All of my military tools are connected there. I have a lot of online courses and videos, and I write for some big publications. All of that information sort of meets there. I'm out in the marketplace helping companies understand either how to hire, onboard, and develop, or how to work alongside veterans. I think sometimes we forget that you bring a veteran into a civilian team and their colleagues might not know how to best utilize those skills, or how come Joe is showing up early and I'm showing up on time, and is he making me look bad, right? Because he's got a different work ethic. How do we navigate working alongside veterans? I do a lot of training around that. My goal is, for this part of my work, is to just, like I said, level set the playing field. Veterans should be given every opportunity to compete for the jobs they're qualified for. And there's so many disconnects around that. My other job is to work with executives and senior professionals on personal branding. And the two work beautifully together, because usually somebody knows a veteran at some point in their life. And so I get to play in both of those fields.
Amazed at the material you had. Your TED Talk was excellent.
Thank you.
And so I encourage people to take a deeper dive, and learn a little more about you, and to get the book Engaging with Veteran Talent. So I'd like to thank you very much, Lita.
Thank you. Thank you for your time and your service and your family's commitment to protecting our freedom.
This podcast will be available on Business 901 iTunes Store and Business 901 blog site. So I want to thank all the listeners for listening.